Hello and welcome to In Pursuit of Clarity, episode number 38, entitled The State of Our Disunion, Thoughts on Where We Are and Where We're Headed. There's simply too much of significance happening simultaneously to even begin to speak to the details and specifics anymore, and this pace certainly isn't likely to slow anytime soon. So I wanted to, once again, attempt to pull back to a broader perspective, and attempt to analyze the broader strokes of what's happening all around us. The trends of our age, which can sometimes get lost in the shuffle as we're constantly prompted to focus on the new distraction of the day. You may have noticed an explosion of discussion and news articles on the topics of what are being called NFTs, or non-fungible tokens, as well as a new trend of large-scale purchases of what's being labeled virtual real estate. These things may seem comically absurd at first glance, to the extent that you might even think they're not worthy of attention or discussion, but I tend to think they're much, much more significant than they might seem. A quick explanation for those not aware. These two concepts are closely intertwined and fairly similar. In the first case, they involve the selling or purchasing of some thing in the virtual world. A picture, a piece of art. It might be almost anything, really. The second case involves the purchase of virtual land or territory within a virtual environment. Some of you might be asking the obvious question, why would anybody pay, in some cases tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars, for something that exists only in a virtual arena? To attempt to give their side of the argument its due, it goes something like this. If we're already spending so many hours of our day in virtual online environments, whether these be games or apps or social media, why not then make purchases that we might, for example, then be able to show off to others, in the same manner that some people purchase a specific type of car or clothes or a work of art to wear as a badge of taste or accomplishment to impress those looking on. From a broader perspective, we can see that these are elements of a new trend, one of removing ourselves from our natural world and toward and into virtual and artificially created worlds, a new trend deeply connected to other similar new trends. As this mystery virus sparked panic and hysteria, leading to a massive power transfer to a technocratic class, and, quote, medical professionals, and their variety of newly established domestic and international organizations, much of the population of the world became essentially prisoners in their own homes. And we saw a unique focus on preventing people from gathering together, and preventing many from even enjoying gyms or churches or pubs, even parks or oceans. As a result of this home confinement, backed by the force of law in many nations, small businesses and all things brick and mortar began to die a slow and painful death, go bankrupt, and disappear, while companies like Amazon post record profits, and Netflix and similar monopolies dominate an even larger share of the average person's daily inputs. And as the real world is increasingly outlawed, a new world is being created for us to act as its replacement. The countless media articles highlighting things like the NFT or virtual real estate conceptions are attempting to create this new reality by doing so. And of course, at least among the subset that still reads them and takes them seriously, it's working. In my opinion, this isn't just dangerous, it's one of the greatest cultural dangers we've ever faced. I've spoken more than once in the past about how our economic system, as constructed via the central banks and our Federal Reserve, our interest and usury and fiat currencies, seems a bit like having an admitted enemy design a game and then subsequently embracing this game, and then devoting the bulk of your time and attention to mastering it, perhaps not realizing the rulebook was carefully crafted to ensure your type might never play a dominant role, and that the maximum amount of your energy is funneled in its direction. Now, of course, we've always had means and methods of barter and exchange, and currencies and some modern economic ideas helped make this a bit more fluid and convenient. What I'm saying here shouldn't be heard as an attack on the most fundamental and basic concepts at play here, necessarily. So we might alter the example, given a moment ago, to say it's a bit like having an enemy stumble upon a very simple and easy to understand game, being carried on in an efficient and straightforward manner, and obtaining power enough to rewrite and restructure the rulebook, and turn it into a complex labyrinthian tome, forever adding details and loopholes and fine print, which few people actually understand, yet which he and his small circle of friends live and breathe, having essentially written it from the ground up, and having made it the central focus of their study, recognizing this mastery as the key to the victory they seek. So, if losing ourselves in this economic game represents something of a trap, an ultra-efficient means of siphoning life energies away from humanity at large, how much more of a trap might this new virtual existence be? Most of you have likely heard by now of the new international organizations boasting about how you'll soon own nothing and be happy. Consider what this means in a world in which those with even moderately dissident political beliefs are being silenced from social media platforms, kicked off of payment processors, seeing bank accounts frozen, and a multitude of other things in the same vein. This new culture has essentially monopolized tech, media, and banking, and focused on these areas for a reason. And they really do have near total control in these spheres, and now only have a small minority remaining to silence or sideline before this monopolization of the public square is complete. Owning nothing, living in a virtual world, spending the vast majority of your hours immersed in it, and devoting your time, your attention, and your energy to the various aspects of it, ultimately represents the most profound power transfer imaginable, from the public and into the hands of this new culture. In a very real sense, they're attempting to recreate our existence, redesign our very reality as we know it. Now, if these major societal changes were being pioneered by a multitude of individuals with a wide range of ideologies and worldviews and conceptions of the future, this might not be such a profound crisis and threat. But looking around at those who dominate these sectors, and realizing that nearly every last one in a position of extreme prominence happens to be left-leaning, if not far left in most cases, happens to seemingly despise Western culture and its traditions, and in many cases, its people, and what they're now calling, quote, whiteness, happens to be godless, childless, materialist, reductionist, transhumanist. One could go on at length listing traits they tend to share. So when I speak of this new culture as a relatively cohesive unit, I think this is justified, and becoming ever more so as they further unify and coalesce with the passage of time. It's scarcely an exaggeration to state that this element essentially hates and wants to completely destroy or disempower those with beliefs like my own. And I might just as well say our own, as most of you listening share similar mindsets. Those with a belief in a creator, those who look to nature and the natural as our guide, who prize a traditional sense of physical, mental, and spiritual health above financial gain, who prize the family unit on both the micro and macro levels, those with an innate and inviolable sense of personal freedom that they're not willing to flippantly discard, and who know the potential dangers of doing so. This type is, clearly, their single greatest enemy, and it's the reason all of their guns are pointed in our direction. So imagine if we were all to put our heads down and allow ourselves to be incrementally herded and drawn into this new virtual world they're beginning to construct. Those same people that today can kick you off of platforms, or prevent you from communicating with like minds, or earning a living, imagine what they might do in this new environment as its leading authors and controllers and architects, with near total control over its resulting shape. And even if this weren't the case, even if this process of virtualization of reality didn't hand ultimate power over to the most small, corrupt, unhealthy, and poorly oriented, what it does is further draw us away from nature, from all things natural. Not just the natural beauty of our world, but face-to-face communication and human contact, healthy interaction and experiences, everything real and genuine and sincere. This move towards the artificial and contrived and man-made and away from nature has always been a net negative. Our diets are a perfect example of this. Our explosion of processed foods, additives and preservatives and chemicals, aspartame in place of sugar, margarine in place of butter, the mass inclusion of soy in nearly everything we eat. Many of these were framed as definitive steps forward until we realized they were anything but, that they were in fact killing us in many cases. Ironically, the healthiest foods are now being rediscovered to be exactly those foods we've always eaten, in their most natural form and unprocessed and unmanipulated forms. And this is analogous to the broader point. Yet, it's just one example of several similar judgment errors we've collectively made. And another would be directly related to our topic at hand, namely our unthinking embrace of technology in general. Our rush to adopt every new development without the slightest bit of thought or consideration or discussion as to its longer-term effects on our psychology and well-being. And we now have another trend, represented best by the meteoric rise of that company and sad cultural phenomenon, OnlyFans, in which any person can now whore themselves out to the general public directly for money, allowing an entire generation of girls to trade their dignity and self-respect for fleeting short-term financial gain, and all the while calling this female empowerment. And it's not just OnlyFans. Pornography and related ventures have absolutely exploded in our age, and I'm not sure any reasonable person would attempt to argue the net effects have been positive. We're also having more and more active and comprehensive discussions on topics like universal basic income, or UBI, the very discussion of which is a leading indicator of just how far astray we've gone. Our economic structure is both broken and rotten to the core. Private institutions like the Federal Reserve own a printing press on which they're free to create essentially as much capital as they wish, which then trickles down the pyramid in the most profoundly unjust ways, becoming more unjust with each passing year. And finally, to encourage the public to keep playing this losing game, to prevent them growing a spine and standing tall and throwing off the shackles, an offer is made to provide a baseline income, scraps from the feasting table, for anyone and everyone, regardless of their contribution or their desire to contribute. In my opinion, UBI is such a clean example of where we've gone wrong, and why the entire system needs to be re-envisioned and rebuilt. As I've mentioned before, consider that we have completely failing infrastructure, increasingly ugly environments, mental health and drug addiction crises, that our oceans remain almost wholly unexplored, as do the Amazon rainforests, as does space above us. Consider that the answers to our origins and history as human beings still lie beneath our feet waiting to be uncovered via energetic work within disciplines like archaeology. Consider that we now have the know-how to re-green vast sections of the planet, turning deserts and barren soil into lush and vibrant greenery. To clean up our pollution mess and to develop means to prevent these problems continuing, to salvage habitats of near-extinct animals that play important roles in the natural food chain, and on both land and sea, slow the skyrocketing number of extinctions we're experiencing. The number of truly meaningful and genuinely helpful uses of our time and energy is practically endless. Yet more and more, we collectively devote ourselves to 9-to-5 jobs, doing some variety of work so divorced from any direct fruitful result, so many steps removed that we can't help but feel the immense psycho-spiritual drain as a result. Intuitively, we collectively know we're wasting our time. An ideal system is one in which everyone is doing something that they can appreciate, that they're good at, that adds real value to the world. Anything that fits these criteria. If a highest priority were placed on a complete reimagining of our, quote, economic system, with an aim towards channeling human energies down these more fruitful paths, just imagine what the ramifications might be over time. Instead, UBI's goal is to pay people to do absolutely nothing, as we increasingly embrace smoking pot and the most superficial forms of drug use and entertainments to fill our empty hours. It's sick, and it's sickness, not just with regard to its broader effects on societies and nations, but consider what this lack of fruitful activity does to an individual. More than nearly anything else in life, people want to be doing something productive or meaningful. It's our nature. It's very much encoded in our DNA. Robbed of this, we'll eventually head down some very, very dark paths. Nearly all of these cultural shifts and trends share a few things in common. They move us from the real to the unreal, from the natural to the artificial, from depth to cheapness, from order to chaos in a psychological sense. And they represent an obvious degeneracy on all fronts. But they also represent a seizing of power and control across the board. The mystery virus situation and the resulting masks and lockdowns represent profound controls foisted on a largely unsuspecting population. The empowerment of self-titled experts and medical professionals, and their slew of newly created organizations with impressive-sounding titles, represents yet another. But if we pull back further, we recognize that these controls aren't intended to be exercised just at the local or national levels. The broader trend is certainly towards globalism and global institutions. The World Health Organization is a prime example here. They currently exercise immense influence over citizens and policies and government officials in several nations. No public elected them or granted them any official powers. Instead, they shrewdly managed to create a backdoor. And it's interesting, if one had to consider what events might open the door for the empowerment of such global organizations, it'd be difficult to come up with a long list. Natural disasters wouldn't do, as these tend to happen in a single nation at a time. A war wouldn't do, as these, too, affect only a handful of nations at once, and being seen as a fully nonpartisan trusted arbiter organization in these cases would be immensely difficult. The three events or happenings that stand out above others as means to this end, in my mind, would be the claim of existential planet-wide climate issues, race issues, or pandemics. And I suspect these will be the three foremost arenas of focus and energy in the coming years. Every step down these three paths means the disempowerment of Western people and cultures and traditions, and the empowerment of unelected parties on both national and international levels, and a massive flow of money and power across all Western nations to the authors and architects of this new culture, and its most dutiful servants. Climate change panic is being used to discuss concepts like the Green New Deal, all of which would transfer trillions of taxpayer dollars to an interconnected web of companies run by the very forces that auditioned and selected Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to play the role of actress in spreading climate change hysteria and pushing a single solution. A bill that, without any doubt, wouldn't just be the nail in the coffin forever destroying the American economy, but cause such immense inflation that the middle class will wake up one day to find that savings they'd worked and saved all their lives to stockpile won't even cover the basics. And to prevent total collapse, assuming this is possible much longer, will likely engage in some extreme form of bailouts again. And guess where the bulk of this money will go? Which individuals and companies and institutions do you think will be first in line to receive? The race and pandemic issues are little different here. Both are being used as a pretext to completely shift the power balance, without actually admitting what's being done, or the why behind it. DC being proposed as a 51st state, the Supreme Court being packed with just enough newly appointed judges to completely swing the balance in their favor, the move to disband the Electoral College and grant still more power to the major urban population centers, and further reduce the influence of the lesser populated, quote, red states, the attempt to purge military and police forces of anyone even remotely free-thinking or right-leaning, the multitude of new, quote, hate crimes bills, which exclusively target a single race for prosecution, despite the overwhelming majority of crimes, including those with racial motivations, being committed by other groups. All of these are power moves, and all part of this same larger trend. All of this taken together paints an extremely bleak and dire picture, and can be disheartening and demoralizing to the point of paralysis. But as I've said so many times before, and will never cease or tire of saying, this point of view is wrong-headed and neglects to take everything into consideration. The worst-case scenario would be if their side wasn't forced to ratchet up the pressure and the pace of their forcible culture shift. Because if done slowly enough, over a suitably long stretch of time, and with the use of celebrities and popular culture to market it all, there's a chance they may have succeeded. As it stands, they're having to move so fast that a significant majority is beginning to feel the truly jarring effects of this new world, and they're starting to be confident enough to vocalize this in numbers far greater than ever before. There's simply no doubt that something has to give soon. The only question is when and where and just how it'll all transpire. Florida, Texas, Northern California, and the Northwest are all discussing secession movements with greater seriousness than ever before. Guns and ammo have been purchased in record numbers over recent years, and hundreds of thousands are now seeking to get out of the cities as quickly as possible, even beginning to completely withdraw from public education and the university system. We needed this quickened pace of cultural imposition and this extreme behavior on the part of this corrupt and sickly alliance of forces attempting to seize total power. And sadly, we'll probably need even more of it until these embers morph into a proper fire and real things begin to become possible and begin to happen organically on their own accord. I'll soon be posting a follow-up to the Call for Revolutionaries video I posted fairly recently, elaborating much more on my own thoughts here. But for now, I can definitively say this much with certainty. I've become convinced that the only way for at least a subset of us to pull out of this tailspin and learn to live again is to find some means to completely shut off the poisons entering the physical and psychological and spiritual bloodstream. From the fluoride and phytoestrogens and heavy metals and microplastics and countless other physical pollutants, to the purposeful draining and demoralizing nature of all media and entertainment, to the indoctrinating and programming effects of all major sources of news and information. Either they need to be outed and somehow cease to be, or we need to find some means to isolate ourselves from their effects, and slowly but surely develop our own parallel institutions in these respects. One can't take in poisonous inputs and expect to somehow, magically, become a healthy human being. One of the most important points to be made about this attempt to dominate through controlling our informational inputs is that it makes it transparent just how fraudulent this all is. How much constant effort is required to maintain unnatural and artificial ways of thinking and being. How much work it takes to convince us of things we'd recognize as completely absurd if this poisonous signal were to stop broadcasting for any length of time. Lying successfully and on a truly large scale requires the devotion of an immense amount of time and energy and money to the task. We're currently locked into a system in which there are virtually unlimited resources available for the job, and still plenty of people willing to sell their souls in exchange for their pieces of silver to help propagate the lie. But we shouldn't deceive ourselves or practice any self-justification for our inaction here. We can simply step aside and create something separate, one way or another. And to be completely frank about it, I think our hand will be forced very soon, as I suspect the goal of things like vaccine passports and this purge of military and police, coupled with the efficient mob tactics now employed with the aim of getting people immediately fired, jailed, or attacked in the streets if they offend the sensitivities of this new culture, is to prevent independent thinkers from living normal lives, and to continue to incrementally tighten that noose until they embrace a subservient orthodoxy. In summary, I think the ultimate goal is a relatively simple one. Work to get to the point where you need nothing from this sick culture. And eventually, working together, we might create avenues and support structures to make this far easier. And keep this in mind. Large-scale detachment and flight of the psychologically healthy productive class is the best thing that could possibly happen, because a parasite simply can't survive without a host. You see how bad things are getting as we speak, and how quickly this is all accelerating. Imagine, for a moment, what places like California might look like if this type of exodus were to continue for a decade or two. If the remaining population was some mixture of the homeless population, MS-13, and illegal migrants, large ghettos filled with fatherless children raised by television and social media, all ruled over by a tiny caste of tech oligarchs and the, quote, journalists who spread propaganda on their behalf. This wouldn't just be a hell on earth, it'd be unsustainable, and would eventually collapse under its own weight. In other words, the best thing that could happen is to give these people what they claim they want, and allow them to experience the multitude of consequences firsthand. I think this is likely where we're headed, and in fact, it may be the only viable solution. The supremely arrogant, pretentious, and self-righteous will soon face a rude awakening when the criminals get tired of freely looting the stores and shops and subsequently move on to home invasions, and their aggressive push to disarm the law-abiding public and defund the police might finally register as serious judgment errors when the problems these truly idiotic policy stances cause appear on their own doorsteps. And that's all for now. I hope you're all well, and thanks for listening.
This is the end, beautiful friend. This is the end, my only friend, the end of our elaborate plans, the end of everything that stands, the end, no say